Hi everyone, welcome to Dear BAMf, the show for PR and marketing pros like you, hosted by Beck Bamberger of BAM. BAM is a communications agency that believes stories move the world. We move stories forward for technology-driven brands that challenge, change, and create entire industries. Today, on the Dear BAMf podcast, we're talking with Rob Gonzalez, co-founder and chief marketing officer of Salsify. Salsify empowers brand manufacturers to deliver the product experience consumers demand anywhere they choose to shop online. His career in software has spanned research, engineering, product, management, and marketing, with a heavy dose of consumer support and sales along the way. Rob does whatever is necessary to make his company and customers as successful as possible. Let's dive in.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Dear BAMf, the podcast for PR, marketing, comms pros like yourself. Thanks for listening. We are well on the way of season 2, as you've heard. And today, Rob Gonzalez from Salsify is on with us, and we're so happy. Hi, Rob.
Hi, Beck. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Are you in Boston right now?
I am west of Boston in the Berkshires.
Okay. How is it in Boston now?
It's really quiet. It's been really quiet since the beginning of COVID. I was living right in the middle of downtown Crossing. There's just a lot of restaurants that are still closed. There's a lot of stores that have closed completely. There was a Walgreens on the corner that's just not reopening. There's a lot less foot traffic. I mean, I lived in an area that had a lot of commuters coming in, and there's still not a lot of people commuting. So pretty quiet.
Oh, it's going to be quiet for a while, I think. But here we are, especially when it gets super cold out there and it's winter and no one wants to be outside.
That's right.
But we're not here to talk about Boston weather or what's going on there. We want to hear about more you before we get into our questions. We got a couple hairy ones this week. Do you want to tell us a little bit, like 60-second blurb on what Salsify does for those who don't know?
Sure thing. Yeah, Salsify is about an 8-year-old software as a service company. We sell software to brand manufacturers to help them win on the digital shelf. So think large global companies like a Bosch or a Levi's or a L'Oreal or a 3M or a Constellation Brands and so on and so forth. Companies that sell across all kinds of categories, and these days that are selling in true omni-channel fashion, where they've got to match their digital marketing to their in-store strategies, and they've got to execute consistently across all of the different digital touch points where they might be being shown to their end shoppers. And so we help them make that transition from the old world of physical retail to the new world of digital first retail.
And for those who don't know, the digital shelf is basically the battleground now for anything in commerce, because where you show up on a page, for example, is everything. If you're above the fold, where on the page you show up, all that good stuff.
That's right. Yeah. And especially you look at the mass market era and the dominance of television as a branding mechanism. TV home penetration peaked over 10 years ago. So for a lot of consumers, all the cord cutters, the Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus watchers out there that haven't seen a television commercial this month, the discovery and the brand affinity and the emotional attachment to all these companies is all based on what the digital experience is.
That's why it's important. And you must be gearing up for, anytime for holidays or anytime for back to school, anything. Anyway, I'm sure you have lots of data to be pulling from and looking at, which is a little bit of what we'll talk about with some of these questions here. So hang tight. But in the last 12 months, Rob, is there something you're super proud of or you want to tout about for fellow comms people here, marketing people?
Yeah. The number one thing that I'm excited about is every year we throw a big conference. It's an in-person conference called the Digital Shelf Summit. That was supposed to be in June of 2020. COVID starts happening. It starts coming through. The news starts looking pretty dire in February. My VP of Corporate Communications, Peter, and I sat down while the office was still open, first week of March, and looked at each other and said, man, this is not happening. This is where we can't do this conference. And so we said, what are we going to do instead? And the obvious do instead is to do a conference, but do it virtually, right? Like you've got a bunch of speakers and you maybe shorten the day a little bit. So it's like 8 to 1 o'clock and whatever it is, right? And so what we said is, that feels like a bad experience. Why would you want to sit in front of your screen listening to people for 4 hours or 5 hours or whatever it is? Why don't we do it? Why don't we pivot this and turn it into a series with a bunch of fireside chats and Q&A and ability to interact with key speakers over time? So we pivoted hard and launched the Digital Shelf Virtual Summit Series in late March and have done consistent video and fireside chat production of that throughout the rest of the year. And it's some of the highest performing work we've ever done from an engagement perspective. It's just absolutely outstanding numeric results. And so for us, I'm really proud that we pivoted hard, and I'm really proud that we took a different approach to the virtual summit that I think a lot of people were taking.
Mm-hmm. I do like how you've made it crumb based too. So now instead of just one big thing on one day from like Zoom hell, you now have all these pieces that happen over time. And then you can also build community that way too.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's similar to one of the strengths of podcasting. We've got a podcast called Unpacking the Digital Shelf, but between Unpacking the Digital Shelf and the Digital Shelf Virtual Summit Series and other things that we're doing, we can bring a lot of people into the big tent. Folks that don't necessarily work with us, aren't customers of the company's product, but become part of the community and become part of the journey, and ultimately can be very helpful to us in winning, expanding, retaining business and things like that. So the bring folks in and the community aspect to it has been very, very big.
Excellent. What about your favorite way to tell a story right now?
My favorite way to tell a story. Do you know the book Storyworthy by any chance?
Yeah.
I read that book recently and I absolutely loved it. For people who don't know it, this is a guy that won the most Moth Grand Slams that you could win. And he's just got this absolute gift.
Matthew Dix, right?
Matthew Dix, yep.
And The Moth is a podcast that it's so lovely. It's just people going up on a stage, quote unquote, now at this point, telling a story, any story. And it's just interesting and so captivating.
It is. And what's great is that he actually breaks down what makes a great story. And there's a bunch of just lessons from the book that I've written down and I'm trying to incorporate in my stories. One of which is you always start with an action. So rather than saying, well, this, about 10 years ago today, blah, 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 you say, so I'm sitting in a cab and we're just stopped. And so immediately, if you put...
You're already in.
And so all of a sudden you start conversations that way and people just naturally stop and they listen to you. And so that's one where I've been trying to incorporate that into when I'm pitching and when I'm presenting in front of folks. If I start with that, it immediately grabs attention. And I think it's just a great tip. And there's a whole bunch of others from that book.
Oh, I love it. Yes, go get it. Grand Slam. So basically it's the person who's won 5 times in a row. Wow. Okay. I haven't picked that up in a while. Now you're inspiring me to pick it up. It's 10 hours unabridged if you get it on Audible. Wow. So there's a lot in there.
Yeah, 10 hours.
Excellent. Maybe I'll get it for my staff. We do Toasters here, which is our version of Toastmasters. And then we give feedback. And as you can imagine, some speeches are enthralling and engaging, and some are could be improved, right? So this is great. Excellent. Way to give a good hot tip, book tip on the podcast. Love that. Okay, Rob, well, we have a couple of questions this week. Here we go. We're going to dive in with the first one. Dear BAMf, not sure what to do here, so I'm seeking some advice. I'm internal comms at a large health tech startup and have handled all things PR related to date. Despite COVID, we closed out the year with media placements that were triple the amount that we set back in the start of January 2020, when we had no idea what this virus was going to be. The issue is the CEO who signed off on our original KPIs isn't satisfied with these killer results. We've been measuring inbound leads and other data to show how much this press has mattered to us this year. So I know this isn't about, we have no idea what the ROI is. My CEO says we just need to do more, but I'm struggling how to get that in a concrete form.
It's a hard problem. I mean, so for me, I am a co-founder of Salsify. And so I've worn many hats over the course of the company. And right now, my span of control is on all global marketing functions, one of which is comms. The person in particular that runs comms, reports to a vice president who reports to me, who reports to the president, who reports to the CEO. And so there's 5 levels of direction between the person that's running comms and running PR and managing this stuff on a day-to-day basis and the CEO. That can mean that what's usually behind the CEO's pressure sometimes can come without all the context on what's on their mind. So when I hear that, what I hear is that there's some context that the PR person is missing, right? That they don't understand. There's some pressure the CEO is under that hasn't been articulated to the PR person in order to put the numbers in context, right? The advice that I would give is to try to gain clarity on what's missing. This pressure is coming from somewhere. It's not the CEO, unless the CEO is some narcissistic jerk. It's not the CEO just making it up in order to give somebody a hard time. It's got to be coming from somewhere. So what is the pressure? Why is it coming down to PR? What are the other areas in the business where the pressure is being shown, and so forth? And understanding that will allow you to have a more reasoned response to it. So I totally get the frustration where you think you're doing a great job. I'm hitting the numbers that we agreed on. I'm actually beating the numbers that we agreed on, and so on and so forth. Why are they giving me a hard time? It's not about you. It's about something else that you're not seeing. So figure out what that other thing is that you're not seeing, right?
Oh, I totally agree with that. And you are in an interesting spot as being like the founder hat and the CMO hat, which is rare. I'm wondering if, and this is where you got to suss out, is there board pressure? Is there a competitor that is eating your lunch? Is there an exit on the horizon and you're marching towards an IPO? Who knows how much you'll be able to get into the mind of, but there's probably something here that's amiss. In addition, here's another layer of it. Perhaps this person has signed off on your KPIs and was like, yeah, okay, great. And is getting the feedback or the judgment that was too lowball, that was not correct, that was wrong. And so even though you've exceeded it, it's like, well, of course you exceeded it because that was really, really low. That was silly for you to even put that. That wasn't even a goal. So there might be some context there that's going on. But the bottom line is you got to dig in more here because what's happening? They should only be thrilled and elated that despite everything going on, you guys have well exceeded what you're doing here. So what's going on? The good news is this person is internal, the one who's writing to us. So you probably have more pieces of the puzzle at being internal to understand what's happening in the company versus if you were an outside agency, it's like, you don't know what's going on. You're not in there in the day to day. You're not seeing the Slacks, the conversations, all that stuff. So dig around, I think is our advice for this.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. There's if I could recommend another leadership book, there's a book called Turn the Ship Around, which is about how a naval nuclear submarine captain took a badly underperforming ship and turned it around by rebooting the culture. And
we just read this for my one class in Pepperdine.
No kidding.
It's Turn the Ship Around. Yep. And it's a submarine and there's like guys on the ship and they're just messing up. And it's, of course, life and death situations. Yes, quite familiar with this.
It's a great book. It's like, it's kind of what, I mean, for me, it's if you could take a leadership book, but turn it into Crimson Tide or the Hunt for the Red October or something like that, then I'm in, you know? And the 3 principles of leadership that he talks about from a cultural perspective are clarity, competence, and autonomy. And clarity is the foundation of this. And that's really what we're talking about behind this question is there's a lack of clarity on what's happening. And getting that context and getting that clarity is ultimately key to overall success in a career and success in business. And so this is one of those things when somebody's putting pressure on you and you don't quite understand it, that means that you're missing something.
Yes. So well said. How funny that damn book. There it is again, connected. I love it. All right, next question here. Dear BAMf, my question relates to what our CEO wants to say, quote unquote, politically, moving forward in 2021 and beyond. For the last few years, she's been a bit demure, though. A, she is an immigrant, and B, we have a product that serves immigrants, sometimes undocumented ones. In particular, we're approaching our next round of funding, and my CEO says that our mission to help immigrants is, quote, not political. But I argue that in today's climate, it is. And we support undocumented immigrants, which is widely noted in our messaging and materials. What are your thoughts about what could propel my CEO to take a firmer stance?
It's a really hard question. I mean, we're in a climate these days where everything has become political, and where
Everything is political.
everything, and people on both sides think the other side is full evil, right? And so
Yes.
younger folks in particular want their companies and their leadership and folks to take a stand on their side, whatever their side is. And they do it publicly. And they see a lot of examples of that are out there, of companies that are taking some type of a large stand. And they think, man, I want my company to do that too. It's a really hard problem. It's a very tight, nice edge to walk as a leader of a company, to take a political stand out there, especially if your goal is to serve lots of different people that might come from differing backgrounds, right? By taking a hard stance on one side of any issue, you're almost by definition shutting off your ability to work with the people that disagree on the other side of the issue. So I have a lot of empathy for the CEO's position here. Me personally, I mean, my dad was a refugee. He's Cuban. He and his sister came over as part of the Pedro Pan operation. And I know a lot of folks that are first generation, second generation immigrants from a bunch of different countries, especially folks that escaped communism and the Soviet bloc and things like that. And everyone's story is totally different. I understand that the desire to stand up for that group more publicly, just like your questioner is asking for. So this is a tough one to untangle. I think my general advice, if you're trying to steer the CEO towards an area where they can have more of a political stance, would be for immigration in particular to look what big tech has done over the last 5 years with regards to immigration. As President Trump's administration, for example, has issued executive orders regarding H-1B visas and other things like that, the CEOs of Microsoft and others in the community, Microsoft, Google, other tech leaders, have come out quite publicly and made strong statements about the importance of immigrants to their businesses. And they've done so in a way that's not strongly partisan, was what I would say. They've kept it about the business that they're in. They've kept it about the market they're in. They've kept it very professional, and they've done it very well. So what I would say is those are good examples of companies that have walked the line, I think, quite effectively without shutting off one side of the debate.
Mm-hmm. I love this question because we had a parallel situation happening here. And the fact of the matter is, the big thing for me in this was that, and we support undocumented immigrants, which is widely noted in our messaging and materials. So the fact of the matter is, you already are making a statement. Now it's about, well, how high is the volume going to be on that? So there's a big difference between, hey, we have that publicly put on our website, we put it in our decks, versus I want to write an op-ed and get that in the Washington Post about why prop whatever needs to, that there's a spectrum there. And so for you, comms person here, is where on the spectrum does the founder, your CEO, fall? Because it's not a matter of if you do, the matter is how loud's the volume going to be. And so take that, I would take this off the plate of like, oh, are we or are we not? Are we supporting undocumented? Yes, you are. Yes, clearly you are. Great. Well, now where do we say and how much do we say? And I would recommend coming up with like a list of, to put it more concretely, like, okay, CEO, do you want to write op-eds and advocate for legislation or comment on presidential declarations of sorts? Or are we going to just talk about the economic impact, for example, of supporting this population? Okay. Do you ever want to be on live TV talking about, let's say, a piece of legislation in the state of California? Or do we just want to talk about the economic impact in the last 5 years of undocumented, the past facts, or prophesizing what should be done or what morally we should be done? There's just like all this gray area. And then the last thing I would say to this, though, is that if that sounds still pretty gray, it's like, okay, hey, let's go back to our values. What do our values say? Hopefully you guys have some guiding principle values that you look towards that guides all of your decisions. Hopefully that's in place. And looking at your values, what would then they suggest? This is a little bit fuzzy, and this is like analyzing the Constitution of like, well, what is the intent? But in a way, hopefully your values should be indicative of where this should be. So for example, if it's about being like, one of our values is proactive. So in this, I'd go like, okay, one of our values is proactive. So that implies to me that we don't sit around and just kind of, oh, we don't really tout this. It's like, no, that sounds like we're going to be doing something about what we stand for. We take action. Hairy question here, but that'd be my recommendation. Go back to the value.
I agree with you. I think that there's something that you said right in the middle that's almost the hardest part, which is clarifying the values, even to begin with. Because you can imagine.
Well, maybe the values update.
Yeah, it's like you can imagine a very subtle position here, which is that as a company, you can stand to support the immigrants themselves, regardless of their mechanism of immigration. And you can also, at the same time, be about better enforcement of legislation and against undocumented immigrants coming in the first place, right? Teasing out exactly where the lines are and where you want to add volume in the argument, I think is actually going to be quite difficult. It's where the work is.
Yeah, this is a difficult one. You know what, though? Here's the last thing to this, though. If you go to your values and you're like, those seem a little stale, those really aren't what we're about, then you might need to do a rehaul on your values. So that could be one last thing. Maybe they don't actually reflect. And by the way, the values shouldn't be something you hope to be. Your values are actually reflective of who you are and what you uphold, if that makes sense. So you might need, and this is where you can ask your team, and there's all different ways to kind of like suss out your values and stuff. But a lot of times it could be a team input type of thing, so that you're not coming from the pedestal, the CEO saying like, well, we believe in this. It's like, well, actually our actions, our behaviors support these things. And that's what's really happening. Those are really your values.
There's an angle here too, which I just thought of. Simon Sinek's The Power of Why.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yes.
People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And so there's another angle that you could take there, is just have them read The Power of Why and just say, look, our why is not coming across loudly enough in our messaging. And we could be our business can grow faster if people just understand. They don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it.
Mm-hmm. It's start with why. By the way,
start with why. There's
so many books that are power of this, but so start with why. I love how many books are coming out of this time.
I'm a huge nerd.
Great. Me too. We got a book club and everything. Okay. Last question here. Dear BAMf, I really do not have a solution here. So please, BAMf people, help me. One of our clients is poorly educated on the value of media relations, and worse, is a circler who, within the same call, goes back to a topic or point that was already addressed sometimes 2-3 times. This is concerning in terms of ever putting this client in front of media, but more immediately, I'm struggling with how to stop this quote unquote circling when also painstakingly educating this client. This is more of like client relation here. Rob, what say you?
I mean, Seth Godin talks about this type of thing quite a bit. Iconic marketer, iconic comms person. If you're not familiar with him, I highly recommend following his blog. This sounds like a client you should just fire. They don't. You don't need to work with anybody that happens to have a wallet and some dollars in it. The great thing about being a great comms person is there's a lot of need for the work in the world, and there's better people for you to work with that you're going to have more fun working with, that you're going to be able to produce more value for. Ultimately, if the client doesn't believe in this to begin with, and you're unable, early on to get them to become a believer, then you're just pushing on a string.
Pushing on a string. Yeah. What struck me in this question is it's twofold. The education issue that seems to not be hitting, and then the circling. So that has nothing to do with the information the person is perhaps receiving, but it's just a communication style that frankly can be unworkable. And to your point, Rob, yes. If now here's the other side of this. You and I can make these decisions. We can be like, okay, bye. And we do. And in my spot, that's what we do come to. But for someone, we don't know where this person sits. If they are an associate manager here at some agency, they might not have that power and ability to, I'm going to assume they're at some level of management because they're talking with this client or educating this client. But that's another wrinkle to consider, is where's the power of this person to make that decision or get it up the leadership ladder to say, hey, boss, we're having a problem. We're having actually 2 problems here. Lack of education that seems to go nowhere, and circling to the point where this person looks to not be media trainable, for example. Okay, there's other solutions you might be able to do with that, but we don't know really where this person perhaps sits on this. So one maybe recommendation, so if this person's like, yeah, I don't have the power to let go of this person, is can you put them through the ringer extensively with the media training? Just go like, we need to try this on, before we do any interviews with any media, let's do this. Sometimes that's quite illuminating because then that person sees, especially if they got to review their own tape, which is nauseating to anyone who has to do that. They see themselves in a way and are oftentimes dumbstruck by how they come off and go, oh, wow, I did really spend 7 minutes talking about one question. Yeah, that's called rambling. You can kind of self-assess that. So my one hope here, perhaps, or one trick of the trade for this person, assuming they lack the power to make a decision that seems going to be better overall, is try that media training where by own self-reflection, that person can come and see how they come off and see their circling. And even better is if you do it in front of a couple other people on the team, because then they've got a little bit of an audience. And basically it's kind of unfurling the issue at hand. So not only that the person themselves can observe that and go, oh God, I kind of butchered that, but others in the room can go, oh, this is not our strongest asset here. We're going to have to work on this. I have seen that approach work exceedingly well, if well executed, in the 3-4 times I've noticed it in in-person trainings in the last 2 years. Ooh. But
it's a great idea.
That's if you can get to that. That's if you can get to that. The other side of this is well, okay, what about the education part? That could come in time. Okay, so I have seen cases where over time, there can be that aha, there can be that, oh, now I get it. Because sometimes you're working with for us, we're working with PhD people with electrical engineering degrees and patents. This is not their area. That's fine. That's why we're on board. And we're not in their area. We don't have any PhDs in electrical engineering, whatever. We don't go to space or things of this sort. So we're all coming from different spheres of expertise and industry knowledge. If though, perhaps this is maybe good for your just mental space. If you say, okay, you know what? Here's the time and date in the calendar at month 6. If we are still at this, we're going to call it. We cannot turn the ship around, basically, just to go back to your book. We can't. And just having that date and time in place will probably help alleviate the stress from your team and also anything else, because it's decided that that's when you're going to decide, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think this is a great idea. To go back to your toasters, I remember I took Toastmasters back in
I love Toastmasters.
Maybe 06, 07. And one of the things that they do is somebody in the room is responsible for counting verbal tics. That's
right. Grammarian, the job.
The grammarian, yes. It's one of those, the tape doesn't lie things. So if you're out there and you're talking and they say, look, you've said the word 47 times in the last 3 minutes, it's brutal to see the number.
Yeah.
I did a video training for PR and presentations with a guy named Jerry, who was a CBS producer in the 70s and 80s. And Jerry filmed me from a bunch of different angles giving presentations. And then I had to watch myself on a big screen. And when I mean a big screen, it's one of those projections that takes up a whole wall.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So that every single thing that I did with my body, where I put my hands, how I slouched, all this stuff was just unavoidable. And it was brutal. And it really did a lot to make me understand strengths, weaknesses, areas of improvement. Tape doesn't lie. So I think as long as the person has a flexible mindset where they've got a learner's mindset, they want to improve in some way in their life, they're willing to put in the work, then that path that you're suggesting there, I think can be very effective. It was very effective for me.
Yes. The power of the tape. Tape doesn't lie. I think that's our quote for this session today. The tape does not lie. No. Oh, Rob, well, we have solved the problems of the day. Not all the problems in the world, but the problems of today on this little podcast. So thank you for being here. Such a treat. All the way from Boston. Here I am in San Diego, but thank you for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Dear BAMf, the advice podcast for PR and marketing pros like you. Our show was created by BAM, a PR and marketing agency headquartered in San Diego and New York City. The music you're enjoying today was composed by Tiffany Dizon, produced by Daniel Kessner, and played by San Diego Symphony's Art of Valon. If you have a tough PR and marketing question you'd like us to answer, write to us at bamtheagency.com/Dear BAMf. Don't forget the F. If you'd like to get notified of our latest episodes, subscribe to us wherever you listen to podcasts and review us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.